All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, councillors and town staff. It's now 6:32 p.m. and we'll begin this agenda briefing forum of the town of Victoria Park. We'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to invite Councillor Karimi to give our acknowledgement of country to the traditional owners this evening, please.
Yan Jerapin Wajak Nga Buja Yakin Nija Bilia Bardo. I am honoured to be standing on Wajak Nunga country on the banks of the Swan River. Ngan Kadich Nunga Mort Ken Karak Nija Wajak Nunga Buja. Ngan Kadich Nija Nunga Birdia Kora Yay Buddha Balapin Wudich Nunga Kadjin Mortwe Buja Yay. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and respect past, present and emerging leaders, their continuing cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, which continues to be important today.
Thank you, Councillor Karimi. We'll now move on to Item 4 on our agenda, which is announcements from the presiding member. So this particular agenda briefing forum is to provide an opportunity for elected members to ask questions and obtain additional information on officer reports in the draft ordinary council meeting agenda. It is not a decision-making forum, nor is it open for debate. Members of the public that may be directly affected by an item on the agenda can make presentations, deputation statements and ask questions prior to the matter being formally considered by council at the next ordinary council meeting. All participation in this meeting will be audio recorded and live streamed on the town's website. The live streaming will be subsequently archived and made available on the town's website after the meeting. This meeting is being conducted by electronic means and all those who are in attendance are expected to extend due courtesy and respect to the meeting. All questions and statements that are made by members of the public are not to personalise any elected member or member of staff. Questions and statements are to be directed to the presiding member, which is myself, and I may choose to call upon an officer of the town or another person to assist with responses. Now, notwithstanding that this is an electronic meeting, there will still be public participation time. There is an opportunity to ask questions and make statements at both the beginning and the end of this meeting. The opportunity to ask questions and make statements at the end of the meeting under our new policy is limited to the following: items on the agenda and those members of the public who did not participate in the first public participation time at this meeting. Public participation time will be held for 30 minutes and any additional time must be by agreement from the councillors present to the meeting and will be extended in 5-minute increments. Any pre-submitted questions and statements will be dealt with first, and then for the first time we will invite members of our community to have the opportunity to join us live in the electronic meeting room and ask their questions and make their statements live for the first time. So we will ask for everybody to be patient as we go through that process, and hopefully it will go as smoothly tonight as it did during our test runs of this new facility. So I just to let people know who may have pre-submitted questions tonight, responses to questions that are pre-submitted or indeed asked tonight during the live public participation session that are taken on notice and relate to an agenda item will be presented in the officer report for the ordinary council meeting agenda following under the heading Further Consideration. Any responses to general matters which are taken on notice tonight will be made available in the relevant ordinary council meeting agenda under the section entitled Responses to Public Questions Taken on Notice. So we move now to item 5 of our agenda, which is attendance. We have all elected members in attendance. We also have members of the town's administration, including the Chief Executive Officer, the Acting Chief Financial Officer, the Chief Community Planner, and Acting Chief Operations Officer, assisted by the Manager of Technical Services and the Manager of Governance and Strategy, together with our meeting support staff. Item 5.1 is apologies. We do have an apology from the Chief Operations Officer, Ms. Adams. Item 5.2 is approved leave of absence. We do not have any approved leaves of absence. Item 6 on the agenda is declarations of interest. And I'll go now to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Valletta, to indicate, are there any declarations of interest, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we have a number tonight. So first one is item 12.1, Councillor Luana Lissandro, impartiality interest as a community member, presented a petition to Council at the Ordinary Council meeting on 18th February 2020 on Millers Crossing, asking for it to be retained and purchased as public open space. Item 12.4, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks, impartiality interest, committee member of the Harold Hawthorn Community Centre. Item 12.5, Councillor Luana Lissandro, a financial interest that's indirect. An elderly family member receives services through Harold Hawthorn Senior Citizens Centre and Homes Incorporated. Item 12.5, Councillor Jasmine Karimi, impartiality interest, daughter attends East Victoria Park Primary School. Item 12.5, Councillor Luana Lissandro, impartiality interest, past member of the Lathlane Primary School Parents and Citizens Association.
Sorry, Mr. CEO, could I just interrupt for a moment? I'm having some trouble hearing some of your words. It's coming across like it's broken up. Now, I'm noticing that all elected members do have their microphones off. I've only switched mine back on for the purposes of interrupting you for a moment. But I am assuming that any other staff who are present in the meeting have got their microphones on mute. I'm not sure if our meeting support person can make any suggestions about what we can do to improve the quality of your audio, because I feel like if I can't hear it very well, chances are members of the community listening, both live and on recording later, won't be able to hear you either.
I'll do a test now, actually. Can you hear that properly?
I can hear you, but it doesn't sound like it's complete. There are parts of your words that are dropping out, and I'm not sure whether that's your proximity to the microphone or whether there's some interference going on in the background.
One moment, and I'll try something different. Can you hear me now, Madam Mayor?
Yes, that's a lot better. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll proceed.
I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Thank you.
Okay, I think I was up to item 12.5, Councillor Luana Lissandro, an impartiality interest, past member of the Lathlane Primary School Parents and Citizens Association. Item 12.5, Councillor Bronwyn Ife, impartiality interest. Some of the members of the AFLW Masters teams are friends of hers. Item 13.4, Councillor Jasmine Karimi, financial and impartiality interest associated with the Perth Basketball Association. First dot point as a financial sponsor of the WABL team. Her children also play for the teams with the club's domestic and WABL competitions. Husband coaches with the club's domestic and WABL competitions, involved with managing teams within the club's domestic and WABL competitions. Item 13.6, Councillor Luana Lissandro, impartiality interest, friends with the residents that moved the initial motion, that is Resolution 13, at the annual meeting of electors on 28th July 2021. Item 15.5, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks, impartiality interest, member of the Rotary Club of Victoria Park and the Vic Park Men's Shed, also a committee member of the Harold Hawthorn Community Centre. All of these groups receive funds and or sponsorship from the town. Item 12.5, Councillor Vicky Potter, impartiality interest. She works for the organisation that is home of the Mackie Street Singers. Item 12.4, Councillor Vicky Potter, impartiality interest. I work for an organisation that is the recipient of an operating subsidy. Item 12.4, Mayor Karen Vernon, impartiality interest. In 2021, she attended a meeting of the board of Harold Hawthorn Senior Citizens Centre and Homes Incorporated to discuss their request for continuation of town-supplied operating subsidies from 2020 onwards. Item 12.5, Mayor Karen Vernon, impartiality interests. I previously attended events held by the Lathlane Primary School Parents and Friends Association, including previous community Christmas concerts. Item 13.4, Mayor Karen Vernon, impartiality interest. During 2021, I attended meetings of the committee and presidents of Submitter 2 to discuss their future needs, although not a lease of the cafe facility at Leisure Life. Item 13.5, Mayor Karen Vernon, impartiality interest. I've had meetings with 2 organisations that have indicated some interest in leasing 10 Kent Street, East Victoria Park, once it was refurbished, including the party mentioned in the confidential attachment to the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Are there any elected members who have a declaration of interest they need to make but have not yet made? Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Vernon. I'd like to declare a impartiality for 13.5, please. I have actually attended events at the Centre of the Arts who are looking to lease the property.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Anderson. I'll go to you next, Councillor Alessandro, assuming Deputy Mayor Anderson, that was the extent of your disclosures. And I should remind elected members, if you are making disclosures about matters that have confidential attachments with information about organisations in it, please refrain from mentioning the names of those organisations. You can refer to it as a party mentioned in the confidential report. Councillor Alessandro.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. I too wish to declare an additional impartiality for 13.5. I have attended events for one of the tenders in the confidential attachment. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Sandro, you broke up right in the middle of that. I heard probably the first couple of words and then it faded away. I think it might have been your movement away from the distance to your microphone potentially, because I could see you moving, and as you moved, your voice went in and out. You could perhaps say it again, please, for us.
Yes, thank you. I too wish to declare an impartiality for 13.5, as I have attended events for the applicant who is within the confidential attachment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sandro. We might just have to give you a gentle reminder if you're speaking later on to keep your voice as close to the microphone of your computer as you possibly can to avoid it fading out towards the end. Thank you. Are there any other elected members who have a declaration of interest that they have not yet made? Councillor Karimi.
Apologies, Mayor Vernon, I'm having issues navigating with the screens. I too need to make a declaration for item 13.5, as I too have attended events by applicants on that matter.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Karimi. I don't know about other elected members, but I also had some difficulty hearing some of what you had to say. So I'm not sure if this is a ominous portend of bad things to come with our sound tonight, but let's hope not. So it's item 13.5 for you, Councillor Karimi. It's an impartiality interest, and yes, it's on the basis that you've attended events by one of the parties in the confidential attachment.
Yes, that is correct, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you. I'm suitably comfortable. Our Minutes Secretary, Ms. Noon, have you managed to get all of that information recorded?
Yes, I have, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you. Are there any other elected members who still need to make a declaration of interest? No, I'd encourage you all to continue to think about that. And if you do have a declaration, it needs to be made before the item comes before this forum. However, it is certainly the case that we may not discuss all items at tonight's agenda. Councillor Ife.
Sorry, I too have the same declaration at 13.5 as having attended events for that same organisation. I'll email it through right
now. Thank you, Councillor Ife. And can I say to all those councillors who have now declared an interest in tonight's meeting, you do need to submit your declaration of interest for the end of the meeting. You can do that either by the online submission tool, or you can do it by sending it through by email. Thank you. We will now move on and proceed with the remainder of our agenda. So we're now at the stage where we're about to begin public participation time. And as I indicated at the outset, we'll be giving priority in terms of order to those people who pre-submitted questions and statements in advance before I call on any member of the public who's joining us tonight with the live participation option. So governance will be making a note of the time and will now commence public participation time at 6:47 p.m. So there are a number of matters that have been pre-submitted. We start with David Wortley of Black Lane, who has 3 questions and a number of statements regarding item 12.1. And I will read out his statements. Statement number 1, in relation to the roads at Raleigh Street and Rutland Avenue, I would like to see these remain cul-de-sacs, no through roads, so that Miller Street does not become congested with further traffic. This is with either them being as they are, open space, or as proposed residential property. Additionally, I would like the roundabout at Miller Street and Bishopsgate Street to remain and no traffic lights added. I do not want vehicles slowing to stop on Miller Street, Roberts Road, or these other 2 streets. I am just going to pause there for 1 second to say, are elected members able to hear me well enough? Thank you. Glad to get that sorted out. So I will continue with Mr. Wortley's statements and questions. His second brief statement is to say, I do not want another train station at Miller Street, as there is already sufficient access to Vic Park or Carlisle stations. I also do not want any additional walk bridges over roads around that area. His next statement, I do not want the side road section of Roberts Road modified in any way, i.e. 7 Roberts Road, and would like the traffic flow to remain as is, whereby entering Miller Street one way and mandatory left turn towards the roundabout. He then has a number of questions which will be directed appropriately. So the first question is, if lots 6 and 7, 1003 and 1004 and 45, 1005 become residential, what does R60 mean in regards to the number of dwellings, the height of the buildings, the type of the buildings, i.e. house, unit, apartment, multi-storey? And I will direct that question to our Chief Community Planner, Ms. Natalie Martin-Good. Thank you.
Through the Chair, thanks for the question. In terms of how many dwellings there could be, it depends on what type of dwellings. So if they are single houses or group dwellings is similar to townhouses. They could have approximately up to 31 dwellings. If they were apartments, or that's otherwise known as multiple dwellings, it could be up to 55 dwellings, and the height could be anywhere between 5 metres and 15 metres. There is some more detail in the report about a combination of permutation of those different types of dwellings and heights.
Thank you, Ms. Martin-Good. The second question that we have from Mr. Wortley is as follows. If lots 6 and 7, 1003 and 1004 and 45, 1005 become residential, would you consider factoring in a publicly accessible small cafe in the dwelling complex? If not, what about one at lot 1002 Beatty Avenue, where the Parks and Recreation open space is proposed to remain? I direct that question again to our Chief Community.
Through the Chair, our residential zoning, a cafe or a restaurant is actually prohibited use. It's an X use. If it was a public open space zone, it could be considered, but as Council are probably aware, we're working on a new town planning scheme. The timing of that scheme and the timing of the development of the land would be important to know in terms of what the new town planning scheme might consider as suitable on a residential owned land in that regard.
Thank you. The final question from Mr. Wortley is, Does this set a precedence to enable further parks and open spaces to be turned into residential dwellings around that area? And I'll address that question again to our Chief Community Planner.
Through the chair, a precedent it is only occurs when you have very similar circumstances. The circumstances of Miller's Crossing is highly unusual, so the likelihood of there being a similar zoning circumstance and land owned by the West Australian Planning Commission wanting it to be zoned residential is highly unlikely. In saying that, though, as the land is owned by the state government, it's up to them what they propose. The town doesn't own the land, it's state government land, and it's up to the state government, i.e. the West Australian Planning Commission and the Minister, as to what that land is zoned ultimately through the scheme amendment.
Thank you, Ms Martin Good. I'll now read the final part of Mr Wortley's contribution by way of statement. He says, I want lot 1002 Beatty Avenue to remain parks and recreation open space. Alternatively, keep Miller's Crossing lot 1003. Now move on to some questions and statement from the Ratepayers Association of Victoria Park. So the Ratepayers Association, there's a combination of some statement and questions. It begins item 15.5, 2022 minor review of council policies in June 2020. Policy 223 was amended to include the provision that town employees issued with a vehicle inclusive of private use conditions will pay a fortnightly contribution rate based on the state government vehicle usage rates as outlined in the Senior Officer Vehicle Scheme. This rate currently commences at $150 per fortnight. Question 1. How many light vehicles does the town currently have? Going to direct that question to our Acting Chief Operations Officer, Mr Denham.
Through you, Chair, 43.
Thank you, Mr Denham. The next question is how many light vehicles are currently issued to employees for private use? I'll again direct that back to Mr Denham.
Through you, Chair, that is 19 vehicles having a private use component.
Thank you. The next question is how many employment contracts have been created, reviewed or renewed since June 2020 for any employee who has been issued with a vehicle for private use? I'll direct that again to you, Mr Denham.
Through you, Chair, the answer is none created with private use within that timeframe.
Thank you. The next question is how many employees issued with vehicles for private use are paying the rate published in the state government's Senior Officers Vehicle Scheme, of which the nominal rate shown in Policy 223 in 2020 was $150 per fortnight? Direct that to you, Mr Denham.
Through you, Chair, the answer is currently 1. And I would add that only fixed term contracts can be renegotiated. Other existing staff with vehicles are subject to the terms and conditions of their existing contracts.
Thank you. The next question from the Ratepayers Association is as follows. On the 29th of March 2022, the Council held the annual electors meeting in the Council chambers with 17 electors present in the room. Why are the Council, ABF and OCM meetings still being held online? So I will answer that question. The annual meeting of electors is a meeting in the Local Government Act that is required to be held in person. That's why it was held in person on the 29th of March 2022. I don't address the assertion in the question about the number of electors who are present in the room, as that's an assumption by the questioner. The question about why the Council, ABF and OCM meetings are still being held online is as a result of a determination that I made in exercise of my powers under the Local Government Administration Regulations. Regulation 14D, subparagraph 2, subsection A of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996 provides that the presiding member or council may make a determination that it is appropriate that meetings of the council be held by electronic means where there is a state of emergency that is continuing in the state. And that is a decision that I have made in January this year ahead of the February council meetings. And I made that decision again in late February ahead of the holding of the March Agenda Briefing Forum and March Ordinary Council meeting, on the basis that there was a continuing state of emergency in Western Australia, and I was satisfied that conditions prevailing were such that it was appropriate meetings that were able to be held online, could be held online, and should be held online. And I made that decision again almost at the end of March, where I determined that the state of emergency continued in place. I also noted in the 4 weeks prior to the end of March that the WA borders had opened on the 5th of March, as a result of which community transmission of coronavirus had escalated exponentially from a 7-day average number of 205 cases daily prior to 5 March to a 7-day average of over 7,500 cases daily, suggesting a greater risk for elected members, administrative staff and members of the public at public-facing meetings in our chamber, and that there were in fact 9,754 cases in the 24 hours prior to me making my decision. And although the WA government had issued further restrictive public health directions at level 2 ahead of the 5 March border opening, there was then a proposal to transition back to modified level 1 restrictions starting on the 31st of March and continuing on the 14th of April. However, I was of the view that there remained uncertainty about what the month of April would bring in terms of the extent of community transmission and the ongoing risk to all persons by public gatherings indoors in limited areas, such as the confines of the council chamber. In relation to next question from the Ratepayers Association, why was the annual electors meeting held in person? Direct that question to the Manager of Governance, Ms. Branovich.
The annual meeting of electors was held in person because local governments can't hold electors meetings online under current legislation. And it was also held in person to allow the town electors to be able to raise motions and vote on them. Thank you.
Thank you. There is now a statement from the Ratepayers Association, which I will read out. This statement says, answers provided at the March OCM disclose that the town has not done a risk assessment in relation to access to town buildings and is relying on the state government's proof of vaccine directions number 3. Direction number 3 does not preclude the holding of public council meetings, nor does it require that proof of vaccine be a determining factor for attendees of such meetings. The next question is, as there is no documented resolution by the council to hold meetings online, who has made the decision to hold the meetings online? As I have just answered in my previous answer, the decision about holding meetings online has been made by myself as the presiding member, as I am entitled to do so under the Local Government Administration regulations. Final question from the Ratepayers Association is, as no risk assessment has been done, please explain on what basis the council is excluding the public from ABF and OCM. I will answer this question. There has been no exclusion of the public from the Agenda Briefing Forum or the Ordinary Council meetings. The Local Government Administration regulations provide a power to the presiding member or the council to make a decision to hold ordinary council meetings and other meetings of the council, except for annual meetings of electors and special meetings of electors, to be held online, provided that the local government makes available a mechanism by which the public can continue to participate in those meetings. That was done by the town's Chief Executive Officer by making an appropriate mechanism available for members of the public to pre-submit their questions and statements to be read out during council meetings. That has continued to be the case until tonight, where we begin our newest process after some testing and investigation of the options open to us, where members of the public are invited to join us live during this meeting. And indeed, I understand there will be members of the public who will be joining us shortly. So there has been no decision by council to exclude public from ABF or OCM. We're not required to conduct a risk assessment on the basis that direction number 3 does not apply to the Town of Victoria Parks Administration Building, and there is no policy that has been implemented by the Town of Victoria Park to exclude members of the public from the administration building on the basis of their COVID-19 vaccination status or otherwise. So I'm satisfied I've answered those questions on behalf of the Ratepayers Association. We now have 2 questions and statements from ratepayer Vince Maxwell. The first question is, in the last 12 months, how many additional staff positions have been created for waste management? What are their position titles and duties? I'll direct that question to our Acting Chief Operations Officer, Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Chair, through you. The answer is 2 multifunctional positions. The first is a project manager with environmental and waste management duties. And the second is a project officer, again, with environmental and waste education duties. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, breaches of the Waste Local Law 2022 approved by Council last month have the potential to result in a person's driver's licence being suspended. Who is responsible for these breaches? Is it the ratepayer or the property or the tenant? Direct that question to Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Chair, through you. The answer is that at Council last month, the Waste Local Law 2022 was endorsed by Council to go out for public consultation. The town's waste local law is based on the model approved by the Joint Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation, where there is indisputable evidence that someone, whether the property owner, the tenant, or a member of the public, had intentionally and repeatedly placed contaminants in a bin, despite having been repeatedly requested by the town to refrain from doing so, that person may be fined $350. And the general rule which is applied, or which will be applied, is 3 strikes with town notifications for proven intentional breaches. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have 1 statement from Mr. Maxwell, which I will now proceed to read out. And it is as follows. Last week, while travelling on Horden Street, I picked up a cardboard box that was in the middle of the road and placed it into a yellow top bin in front of someone's house. The bins had not yet been emptied. Under the waste local law passed by Council last month, there are penalties for placing items in the wrong bin. Had I placed the cardboard carton in the green bin, the owner of the property could have been fined by a town officer who under the local law has the power to issue a $350 infringement without warning. It is unclear in the local law as to whether the owner of the property or the tenant would be fined. My point is that neither of them in this example would have been responsible. However, the effect of the infringement would make them guilty, and they would have to prove their innocence under the threat of greater penalties, including fines of up to $5,000 and the suspension of their driver's licence. There is no provision in the local law that could cause the CEO or his appointed staff to investigate or to first issue a warning. Any discretion that the CEO or his appointed officer may apply is determined purely on their own judgment. There is no formal process in the local law to protect the rights of citizens. I believe the Council have erred in providing this unfettered power to the CEO and urge the Council to amend this local law to include some checks and balances. That concludes the statement from Mr. Maxwell, but I will highlight Mr. Denham's answer to the previous questions by Mr. Maxwell made it clear Council has not endorsed the Waste Local Law 2022. They have endorsed for the draft to go out for public comment. So until such time as it has been endorsed by Council and it has been approved in the normal way for local laws, it will not actually be the law. We now also have pre-submitted from Steve Walker of Bentley 2 questions and 1 statement regarding item 12.2 at Etwell Street. Question 1, considering the known facts of the 2021 May, June, July consultation process of the November Council meetings, why did relevant town officers not forward the draft November transport strategy to City of Canning and City of Belmont by emailed letter request during November or December 2021, so they could contribute any real comment. Direct that question to the Chief Community Planner, Ms. Natalie Martin-Good.
Through the chair, the town did provide the draft transport strategy and parking management plan to both the City of Canning and the City of Belmont. We just didn't receive any comments from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin-Good. Next question, please explain the length of time the hired consultant WSP was engaged for drafting and finalising the April 2022 revised Town of Victoria Park Transport Strategy and the total fee paid to them. Again, direct that to Ms. Natalie Martin-Good.
Through the chair, the consultants undertook work for the town between February and September last year at a cost of $104,000.
Thank you. Next is a statement from Mr. Walker, which I will read out as follows. The statement reads, regarding Atwell Street, East Victoria Park, despite receiving no explanation from Town of Victoria Park officers, my understanding is both the duplicate residential compounds at 63 Atwell Street and 66 Atwell Street were built by the same owner at the same time. Year 1988 Legacy City of Perth Shepparton Ward decision, purely for short-term student accommodation, despite being right in the middle of residential suburbia, that each has 15 rooms, rear laundry, washroom and car parks for 12 vehicles each. This is your publicised Atwell Street local centre. As of April 2022, it seems only one shop business on the local centre section is open. The two residential compounds with their deliberate short-term stays that avoid residential tenancy agreements, avoid 6-month leases, avoid 1-year leases, avoid non-students, are dominating the local centre and appear to be dictating its direction. That concludes the statement pre-submitted by Mr. Walker. That also concludes all of the pre-submitted public questions and statements. I now understand that we have a member of the public who wishes to ask a question live in our meeting, and we'll now be about to hear from Amy Holdsworth, who will be the first person to join one of our council meetings held electronically online. So I could ask our meeting support person, Ms. Bray, to usher Ms. Holdsworth into the room. I can see her now. It's indicated that she is present. So Ms. Holdsworth, we're still in the middle of public participation time. You may ask your questions and make any statement that you wish to do so, but please do note that we do have meeting conduct rules around appropriate conduct when asking questions. Questions and statements are not to personalise any comments regarding elected members or town staff. So if you would like to, please begin with your questions, and we'll do them one at a time so that I can direct them to the appropriate staff member for answers. So welcome, Ms. Holdsworth, and please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Also, I have 3 questions and 1 statement. All of my questions relate to item 16 of the agenda, and specifically to the officer response to the notice of motion and officer comment. My first question, I will give it a small brief summary before that to give context. Officer comment 2 for this item states that feedback has already been sought from a sample of the business community at the business breakfast held on 8th of February 2022. 2 survey questions were asked of the attendees. My question is, how many attendees of the February 8th business breakfast provided answers to each of these 2 survey questions?
Thank you, Ms. Holdsworth. I'm going to direct that question to the town's Chief Community Planner, Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, there were 32 responses from attendees to question 1 and 33 responses to question 2.
Thank you, Ms. Martin-Good. Ms. Holdsworth, your next question.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Question 2 relates to officer comment 2D, again, part of item 16 of the agenda. Officer comment 2D states that a broad survey of the community was also undertaken in 2020 to ascertain the impact of COVID-19 and in response to the above, a support local project is being launched. My question is, are the measures the town are currently implementing or intending to implement to support local business based on the current needs of the community right now as assessed through community engagement, or based on data that was collected 2 years ago when we did not have community transmission mandates or the same long-term restrictions?
Thank you, Ms Holdsworth. I direct that question to Ms Martin-Good.
Through the chair, the current measures that we're implementing are based on the town's current feedback from the business community. So in particular, the February 2022 business breakfast feedback. In addition, we regularly meet with community groups, and also we have recently done some engagement, more general engagement on different projects, but we often get feedback in related to business COVID effects. The 2020 survey is just another source of information that the town has used to inform its communications and approach relating to COVID. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms Martin-Good. Ms Holdsworth, your next question, please.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Question 3 relates to Officer Comment 6 from Agenda Item 16. Officer Comment 6 refers to statistics from the ABS and state that these provide insights into the prevalence and nature of impacts from COVID-19 on households in Australia. My question is, given the ABS data represents Australia as a whole and is not state specific, and given not all states in Australia have the same level of restrictions in place, and therefore any impacts are possibly not comparable state to state, what section of the ABS data gives insight into the specific nature of impacts from COVID-19 on households in Victoria Park?
Thank you, Ms Holdsworth. I'll again direct that question to Ms Martin-Good.
Through the chair, I'll need to take that question on notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Martin-Good. Ms Holdsworth, did you have any other questions that you wanted to ask?
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I have a statement, not a question.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. We generally don't distinguish at agenda briefing forums between questions and statements. We just call it public participation time. We find that's a little easier for our community. So you may proceed with a statement if you wish to make one.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to refer to the answer from question 1 regarding the number of businesses that participated. I note that the first question was 32, the second question was 33. Coincidentally, I have a number that is 33. During March, I spent a few hours visiting businesses in the Vic Park area and I spoke with owners and managers of 33 businesses. In these conversations, I asked these business owners and managers if they would be open to answering my questions regarding the impact COVID-19 and associated mandates are currently having on their business, and a reflective back in the last 6 months. So the 33 businesses, I actually spoke with a few more than that, but 33 businesses did volunteer to answer these questions, and I did a collation of their answers. I would just like to provide 3 summary statistics on that, just as a point of reference. So that same figure, 33, 76% of businesses that I spoke to reported a decrease in revenue in the last 6 months. 70% of those businesses reported an increase in operating costs in the last 6 months, and 48% of businesses reported that they currently have less staff than they did 6 months ago. So that is this is within the last few weeks, that snapshot of businesses, which I would note represents a fairly consistent number than attended the business breakfast, and that's the information that I have received from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Holdsworth, and thank you for joining us, as I say, as the first member of our community to take up the opportunity to participate live during an electronic meeting of our council. So thank you very much. I will now say that we'll conclude public participation time, since I've not been notified that there are any other members of the public who are waiting to enter the electronic meeting room. And we will now proceed with the remainder of our agenda. Item 8 is presentations. We have none. Item 9 is deputations. We have none. Item 10, method of dealing with agenda business. Although we don't make any decisions at agenda briefing forums, I would like to say this to elected members. We have received indication of questions from elected members so far in relation to only 3 items on the agenda. They are item 12.1, the modified amendment number 56 to Town Planning Scheme number 1, Millers Crossing, Carlisle. Item 12.2, the Transport Strategy and Parking Management Plan, and item 15.3, which is the review of Policy 404, Fireworks Management Results of Public Consultation. Now, in accordance with our usual process for agenda briefing forums, we'll only deal with those items on the agenda that elected members have indicated they have a question to ask, or multiple questions to ask for that matter tonight. Are there any other items on the agenda that are not included in 12.1, 12.2 and 15.3? I'm now going to go through elected members and have you add the item numbers onto our list so that we make sure we get through all questions. So I'm going to hear from Deputy Mayor Anderson first, followed by Councillor Hendricks and then Councillor Hamer. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I'd like to ask a question on 14.2, please.
Sorry, was that 14.2?
Yeah, 14.2. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hendricks.
Sorry, Mayor Vernon. Thank you, Mayor Vernon. 13.2, I'd like to ask a question on, please.
Thank you. I'll add that to the list. Anything else? Councillor Hamer.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Number 16 for me, please.
Number 16, thank you. Next, I did see Councillor Ife. I think you had your hand up, but it's disappeared now. Would you like to add another question?
I did. I was going to add 16.1, but Councillor Hamer beat me to it.
All right, thank you. That's good to hear. Any other items on the agenda that elected members would wish to ask about? It's going to be a case of a bit of going, gone. For this, I would like to add one item in that I would like to ask a couple of quick questions about, and that item is item 13.4, which is the proposed disposal of cafe spaces at Leisure Life and Aqualife by way of lease. Which unfortunately does mean, Councillor Creamy, having declared a financial interest, you will need to leave the meeting when we get to that particular question, or that particular item rather. But I will note that and remind you, because with us using the Zoom webinar function, members of our community, that means that Councillor Creamy will be exiting the meeting completely and will need to log back into the meeting as there are no breakout rooms during the webinar. So we're proceeding now forward, and we are starting with questions on item 12.1, which are the Chief Community Planners reports. So if we could proceed to those first, please. Thank you. So these are questions in relation to item 12.1, which is the modified amendment number 56 to the town planning scheme. Number 1, residential density upcoding, Miller's Crossing, Carlisle. Councillor Hendricks, you have some questions, and then I'll go to Councillor Alessandro.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I've got quite a few questions on this one, so is that okay? Just fire them off one at a time.
Yes, I think I was given an indication that you had about 4 questions, but there's no limit on elected member question numbers, so please proceed. What I will get you to do, though, is do your questions one at a time so that we can direct them appropriately to the officers who are here to help.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the first question is, a motion should be written in the command tense and require the council to do something. Points 2 and 3 of the recommendation should be in command tense, but they are not, so they don't read correctly. By that, I'll just read point 2. So it would say, as it is now, that council, the scheme amendment report documents being modified to reflect. That doesn't make any sense. Same with point 3, the council, the documents referred to in point 2 above, and so on. So my question is, what is the command for each of these points, and can they be worded correctly for the OCN?
Direct that question to Chief Community Planner, Ms. Natalie Martin-Good.
Through the chair, Councillor Hendricks is quite correct. There is some words missing in 2 and 3, such as endorses, and point 6 needs to be changed to point 8. We will make those corrections for OCM. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hendricks, your next question, please.
So the next question, if lots 1004 and 1005 were combined and offered as a single lot, in order to create a larger parcel of land which would be more conducive to which the aim of this, to showcase a classic development, who would make that decision and who would action it?
Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, that would be the West Australian Planning Commission.
Councillor Hendricks, please proceed.
Was there a guarantee that they would do that, or was it or is it up to them completely and we just get what we get?
Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, while there's no guarantee, if I was a land developer, either wanting to develop it as the commission or sell it, it would make sense to actually amalgamate them into one lot because you're able to get a higher dwelling yield. But to answer the question, there's no guarantee, but highly likely in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. And another question. Out of the submissions, there was 53 out of 60 submissions which opposed the R60 residential zoning. So what would be the consequences if we were not to go along with this resolution?
Direct that question to Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, it would be the Minister of Planning that ultimately makes the decision on the amendment, and not supporting the officer recommendation would not likely change either the Minister's or the West Australian Planning Commission's position on this. It's been the same for some time. Not supporting the resolution would also forfeit any potential for a local development plan to be considered as a requirement of the land. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple of other questions which I didn't send through because I thought of these ones afterwards.
Please proceed, Councillor Hendricks.
So the next
and again, do them one at a time, please.
Yep. So the next one is it's going to ask, how can a high quality medium density housing be ensured when point 14 of the report, it states that a local development plan would also assist in ensuring that future development of the sites could be indeed a showcase for high quality medium density housing as stated by the intention. Unfortunately, such intentions do not guarantee such an outcome. So my question is, how can it sort of be ensured that we're going to get a high quality housing, but there's no guarantee of it? It's sort of
We'll just confine ourselves, Councillor Hendricks, to the questions without accompanying statements of sentiment. Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, in the town's opinion, the best way of ensuring a high quality sustainable outcome is through the requirement to have a local development plan. So a local development plan will go above and beyond what the minimum R code requirements are, and a local development plan is binding. If you don't have a local development plan and you purely rely on the provisions of the R codes, it is left to chance depending on how good a developer and design you get. With purely the R codes and no local development plan, if you get a great designer, then yes, you could have a good outcome, but the contrary may also be the case. Thank you.
Okay, and the last question I have is to do with the trees. So if they did take away trees, I think our local tree planting policy states that there'll be one tree, or they need to provide one tree for each dwelling. So if there's say 30 odd dwellings, the question is, can they put 30 trees with a high, with a lot of dwellings on the block, on that block, or do they need to put the extra trees somewhere else.
Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, I would doubt there would be room for 30 additional trees on site. However, it would be a common sense approach to allow those trees to be planted in the immediate locality, preferably on public land and or the street verge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Hendricks. Councillor Alessandro.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. Just following on, in relation to the officer's comments earlier in the discussion, I think with the community, there was a question about the total number of dwellings for R60 being either 31 if group and 55 if an apartment. There was a height for the apartment of 5 to 15 metres. What would be the height for possibly 31 dwellings?
Direct that question to Ms. Martin Good. And again, Councillor Sandra, we'll need you to try and keep your voice close to the microphone because I lost you there at the last bit. It trailed off. Ms. Martin Good, are you able to answer that question?
Through the chair, yes, I did hear most of Councillor Sandra's question, so hopefully I'll be answering it. I think you asked what would the height be of the 31 dwellings. So it will vary, and it also depends on whether there's a local development plan. So a local development plan can prescribe any height that is deemed to be appropriate. If you don't have a local development plan and you're relying purely on the R codes, then whether it's single houses, group dwellings or multiple dwellings, the height can vary between 5 metres and 15 metres. So 5 metres is generally a 1 or 2 story house, 15 metres is generally a 3 to 4 story dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you. If the WA PC seeks a higher zoning, such as R80, would this be something that would come back to council, or would this be, just hearing from the responses, something that the WAPC could instigate or that the town could delegate in terms of zoning at 80 or higher? Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, notwithstanding that the state isn't seeking to zone the land R80, but let's assume that they would, the town doesn't have the delegated authority to approve that. They would need to, the Commission and the Minister would need to instruct the town to re-advertise that, because that would be a significantly different proposal to R60. Council will then re-advertise that, and a similar process to what's happening now would then come back to Council for then a recommendation to the Commission and the Minister. But again, it is the Minister that has the final say, not the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Subsequent question. If it is zoned at R80, then what would be the composition of the number of dwellings on that site? Ms. Martin Good. As well as height.
Through the chair, I would need to take that on notice. However, in terms of the density, R80 is an apartment zoning. So there is actually no minimum lot size for apartments. Rather than a minimum lot size, it is the number of dwellings is constrained by design, having regard to setbacks and height. So it will be a very open-ended question in terms of apartments. Also at R80, it would be highly doubtful whether you would get single houses or group dwellings, otherwise known as townhouses, with an R80 zoning. And R80 zoning is very much geared towards apartments. Thank you.
Thank you. They're all my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Sandro. Councillor Hendricks, you've got your hand up again. Do you have more questions?
Yes, I did have one more. If the developers come up with a design that suits them, can they go to SAT and have their design approved, even though we don't like it?
Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, an applicant could only go to SAT if they either got a refusal from the town or the JDAP. JDAP, I suspect, would be the determining authority, or they get a deemed refusal, which means they don't have a decision, i.e. we've taken more than the statutory time. So the short answer is yes, they can go to SAT. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hendricks. Are there any other questions about item 12.1? I'm just trying to check because I'm not seeing all councillors on my screen at the moment. So I'm trying to ascertain if there's anyone. I should say to elected members, you are all aware you can raise your electronic hand, which probably gives me the greatest understanding of whether you're seeking to ask a question. Councillor Sandro.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. Just a subsequent question in relation to road reserve and whether there is a road reserve through those lots and whether a map could be indicate where that road reserve is. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Councillor Sandra, I didn't hear your question and I'm pretty sure it won't come out on the recording well enough. You said that it was in relation to a road reserve that was through those lots.
Yes,
what were you wanting
correct.
to know about the road reserves?
Just where that road reserve is located within those lots.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, hopefully there'll be an attachment that actually shows the current zoning, because those 3 lots are a combination of road reserve, residential R30 and unzoned land. So just because I don't have it in front of me off the top of my head, the most northern lot, about 50% of the lot, it's almost cut in half in terms of what is zoned road reserve, and then it tapers down to slightly less than half to the more southern lots. But there should be an attachment in there. Very happy to, in the further comments section, OCM maybe point that out a little bit more clearly for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin Good. So there being no indication of any other questions in relation to this item, we'll now move on to item 12.2 on our agenda, which is the Transport Strategy and Parking Management Plan. Councillor Devereux, I understand you have some questions that you would like to ask.
Yes, I do, Mayor Vernon, if I may. Thank you. I wanted to say that to start with, I really appreciate the minor refinements to the work on the transport strategy that have responded to some of the feedback that was received. I have 3 particular queries about the new draft. The first one relates to what I note in point 3 of the officer's report, which talks about aligning with the document's vision and improving clarity for the community in the changes that are made. The vision states to provide an integrated, accessible and sustainable transport network which connects people to places and supports the town as a livable inner city community. I wanted to ask, given that, could the strategy title be modified to say integrated transport strategy, so that it could better convey the intent of this vision to connect people and places?
Direct that question to Ms. Martin Good, please.
Through the chair, administration have no issues with that change. The neatest and simplest way to do that is when council considers this item at April OPM to just have a simple amendment regarding the renaming in that respect. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My subsequent question is, given the officer's recommendation 27 suggested adapting images to better represent the town's current and desired vibrancy and pedestrian orientation, I wondered if the integrated element was to be included, could the front page framing image capture this integrated vision in a different way, like the corporate business plan, which shows a vibrant street with pedestrians, family cyclists, trees, shops and cars?
Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, that's a relatively simple change to make. We could even do that after it's adopted, because it simply would be considered a formatting change. Thank you.
Councillor Devereux.
Thanks very much. The third question was that I really appreciated seeing the strategy on a page that's been put together, which really captures in simple terms the intent of the strategy. In keeping with the above questions, I wondered if part of that strategy on a page could include a representation through an image of the same sort of vibrant, livable, people-centred streets as part of that one-page strategy.
Ms. Martin Good?
Through the chair, yes, happy to make that change. Thanks.
Councillor Devereux?
Thanks. Last question. I note the transport mode shift target on page 30, and I look and wonder, given the stated aim of this is to measure the success of this strategy in meeting the town's vision and objectives, I wonder if it would be possible, in addition to the mode shift target, to consider other modest and simple indicators that could be included, for example, related to the provision of infrastructure or other innovations of the sub-programs, like the end-of-trip facilities in town assets, the infrastructure for cycles and e-rideable devices, or streetscape improvements and skinny streets. I wonder whether that could allow tangible short-term recognition of progress and success broader than just the mode shift. Thank you.
Ms. Martin Good?
Through the chair, the short answer is yes. In any event, we'll need to report on the performance of the Transport Strategy Program, which includes reporting on all of the sub-programs and all of the projects. This is quite similar to how we report for Urban Forest Program and Economic Development Programs. And that reporting will provide outline of success and the progress of the program of work. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Devereux. Is there anyone else with questions on this item? No, in that case, we will move on then. The next item that was indicated on the list was item 13.2. So 13.2 is investigation of a verge bond system. There we go. So questions about this item, please. Councillor Hendricks.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Vernon. My question was to do with the officer's recommendations not to go ahead with it because of various reasons. So I was wondering if they had investigated the possibility of maybe putting a camera on the either the demolition side or building side, or both, just for the duration of the project. And that way they can identify who's actually making the damage and recoup the money that way. I was just wondering if that was something that the town's considered.
Direct that question to the Acting Chief Operations Officer, Mr. Denham.
Through you, Chair. Yes, that the possibility of putting in cameras and CCTV has been investigated. If I could perhaps refer that question to Mr. John Wong, Manager of Technical Services, who can comment further on that.
Thank you. Mr. Wong.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just trying to find a unmute button. Yeah, through the chair, we are still investigating the use of CCTV or similar type of camera systems to monitor the construction activities affecting the verge area. So it is something that we are keen to adopt. And we might even consider a trial for a high-risk construction project. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Hendricks, anything further?
No, that was it. Thank you, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question that follows on from that answer from Mr. Wong. Given that elected members have recently been informed about the significant expense involved in using cameras to monitor noise from premises, how expensive would it be to be installing cameras for extended periods of time during some building constructions that can last for months, if not longer, for the town? And what is it likely to take in order to store all of that electronic data, just so that you can look at it all later and determine whether or not there is damage that can be the subject of compensable action by the town? Mr. Wong?
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. We definitely are aware that the hiring or even buying of such cameras will be expensive, and also to have somebody to monitor or to extract the relevant footage from the recording will be quite time consuming, and obviously could be costly as well to have a staff member or even a contractor doing that. So that's something that we are still investigating. Unfortunately, we don't have an indicative cost for such camera use at this stage. So if it's okay, we will take the question on notice and perhaps provide further information as part of the further consideration section of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wong. We'll take that on notice. Are there any other questions about item 13.2? Councillor Hamer.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Is it possible to go back to 12.2 after this question?
Yes, we can. Do try and do these matters in order if we can, Councillor Hamer.
I did have my hand up. You just missed it at the end. Sorry.
Did I?
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. If that's the case, if you see me moving on, it means I have not seen your hand up. So please speak up.
Will do.
Obviously, the electronic hand can only be seen by me at the moment. Something is guiding my screen, and I can only see a handful of elected members, not all of them. So that might be something to do with the organisation of this software. So we will go back to item 12.2, but please, I encourage councillors, don't wait around if you hear me go past the item that you want to deal with.
I think Luana might have a quick question.
I can see that, Councillor Hamer, thank you. I was about to go to Councillor Alessandro if her question relates to this item.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. Just a question for 13.2, coming out from obviously the comments about trials. Given the recommendation as it is, if that were to occur, would that have to be an amendment? Would that have to be an additional point within the recommendation in terms of allowing for a trial to occur, if that is what council seeks to endorse? Thank you.
Thank you. I might go to Mr. Denham first, given that that's like a higher order question about this item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It could be dealt with by means of an additional recommendation, or perhaps, which perhaps could be framed, if council is so minded, just as a recommendation to look into the scope to use cameras or CCTV. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sandro. Mr. Denham, if I could just flesh that out with you for a moment. So you're saying that if council wished to direct the town to conduct such a trial, they would do that through an amendment to the officer recommendation, but otherwise, would it be open to the town to conduct such a trial in the course of their ordinary business, subject to there being sufficient budget available for that whenever the next budget cycle commences? And that would occur just as a part of the town's ordinary business, completely aside from this particular item on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. The second part of your question is indeed the case. The town could look into doing this in the ordinary course of business, subject to budget.
Thank you. Any questions arising, Councillor Sandro?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. Just arising from the officer's comments, if it is not an amendment to this item, how would feedback be conveyed back to elected members if the town did have sufficient funds and were able to undertake a trial? Thank you.
Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would use the EM portal to provide this feedback to elected members. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Denham. Anything further, Councillor Sandro?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. Given that response, if it were not part of the amendment and was done through the budget and through the town administration, would that trial be available to the community in terms of its results if it's not through an amendment? Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Sandro, there was a couple of words there that cut out. You asked, would it be the results of the trial you are wanting to know would be available to elected members?
No, right? If the results of the trial, if it was through a budget item and not an amendment, how would the community be able to access those results if they were wanting to know the results of that trial if it was not part of an amendment on the item? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm assuming the answer to that question would be those members of the community who are interested may be able to make such an inquiry at a subsequent council meeting, or they could write into the town, or the town might choose to publish details of such trial to the community. Mr. Denham, would that be right, or are there other mechanisms that results of such a trial might be shared with the community or available to them?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It could be done in the way that you have explained, and also the recommendation already provides for a sort of a formal mechanism to detail and report back on damage to infrastructure, and we could probably sort of accommodate that through that part of the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Sandro?
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the Minutes Secretary, please, to move us back to item 12.2. Councillor Hamer.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. My apologies. My question was just about the profiles that they have in the transport strategy. Is there any way to mention, I've seen in other documents, there was like a percentage mentioned of high 70 to 80% of people who live in the town who actually work outside of the town, and vice versa. People who work in the town are actually travelling from outside of the town. The profiles mentioned didn't sort of pick up on those figures. Is there anything to add there?
Ms. Martin-Good?
Through the chair, are you talking about the 8 user profiles that are in the transport strategy?
Yes.
Those are hypothetical people used to test what's the actions in the transport strategy. So I understand what you're saying in terms of there are statistics that relate to people that either live in the town or work in the town, but those user profiles are there to test the strategy's robustness, one might say. So they're a little bit different. Thank you.
Okay, so they're not meant to reflect what's actually happening?
Ms. Martin-Good?
Through the chair, they are. It would be very strange if we chose a user profile that is completely foreign to the town, but I don't think that they're meant to be statistically perfectly representing every single facet of the town. That would be really difficult. There would probably be 100 profiles. We did pick 8 that we thought were generally commensurate with people that could be in the town, but it is not meant to be 100% representative, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. One more further question. Page 30 has the targets, which mention the pie graph with the 12% bus and the 2031 targets. Are those percentage increases ambitious, or are they what the town is hoping for? I mean, I was a bit confused with the colours, trying to reference which was which, to be honest.
Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, the colours are the same. It's the change in the percentages that are aspirational. So, for instance, I don't have it in front of me, but from memory, for instance, the current to the 2030 aspiration for car usage, look at the percentage. The colour is the same, but the percentage is decreasing for the percentage of people that are using cars to get around the town. So the way to read that is that the colours are the same. Look at the change in percentage as aspirational targets. Thank you.
Okay, just in my screen, the bus and the bicycle look to be the same colour, so there's just some ambiguous there for me.
Ms. Martin Good, anything arising out of that comment from Councillor Hamer?
Through the chair, very happy to provide some further explanation of that in the further comment section of the report, if that's helpful to Councillor Hamer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin Good. Thanks, Councillor Hamer. If we can now go forward, please, to item 13.4. 13.4 is the proposed disposal of the cafe spaces at Leisure Life and Aqua Life by way of lease. So I had essentially only one question, but depending on the answer to that question, I might have another. My question is predominantly in relation to the cafe space at Leisure Life, where the officer's report indicates that since the surrender of the previous leases for those spaces were completed, that a casual arrangement had been entered into by, this is item 13.4. Is Councillor Karimi gone?
Yes, she has left the meeting.
Great, thank you. So confirm at 7:53, Councillor Karimi's gone from the room already. So going back to my question, with that casual arrangement with the Basketball Association, if we were to approve re-advertising of these spaces and we again did not receive any expressions of interest that were compliant, what is the officer's position about, at that stage, seeking to separately move towards a more formalised position for the Perth Basketball Association for the cafe at Leisure Life, assuming they were to want that to continue? Is that an option, Mr. Denham?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The feedback we've had from the sort of facility managers is that the Basketball Association's arrangement is working reasonably well. It is a fairly limited service, which is limited to certain times. But yes, it could be looked at to retain the Basketball Association in terms of their existing hire arrangement, or in terms of some other enhanced arrangements, whatever they would be willing and able to deal with. I would point out that if we were to move to say a lease with that association, the retail shop legislation does not allow a landlord to impose a requirement on a retail shop tenant to be open for certain hours. It's fair go legislation, and if it were intended to have a binding commitment from the Basketball Association to be open sort of for longer hours, it may not be possible to achieve that because of the limitations of that legislation.
Thank you. So in the officer's report on this item, referring to, I guess, the community purposes aspect that it's said in the report, I guess, is the intention for trying to achieve, by way of disposing of these spaces. Noting that there's reference to social enterprises, is that a limitation for seeking a future tenant? And if that continues to be a limitation after potentially another round of advertising, is there a mechanism for council to consider changing that limitation in order to, I guess, broaden the scope of parties that might be able to apply to utilise the spaces under a lease or a licence or some other arrangement? Mr. Denham?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I have understood the question correctly, I think we have already moved towards that sort of position with recommendation 2, which no longer requires that a social enterprise be a criteria for the new lease, and merely that the criteria be that we seek a service provider, community or sporting organisation that would complement the services provided by the town at these centres. Thank you.
Thank you. So my final question then is, so is it the administration's view that we could not make that change now with the submitters who've already made proposals? Do we have to re-advertise with that new criteria? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Mr. Denham?
Through you, Chair, we think it would be advisable to advertise with the new criteria. We'd potentially be looking at a much wider market if we did that with the new criteria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any further questions on this item. Is there any other elected member who's got a question about this item? I'm not seeing any hands going up, so I'm assuming that there are no more questions about this particular item. So on that basis, we will move on to the next item that was indicated, which is 14.2. And that is schedule of accounts for February 2022. Deputy Mayor Anderson, you have questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor Vernon. It's just in relation to a line item from the 10th of February, and it's for the Australian Institute of Management for $16,274.50. Could I have some more clarification around what training that is, please?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Anderson. To our Acting Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Ellis, is that a question that you're able to assist us with, please?
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Through the chair, I'll take that on notice, please.
Thank you. We'll take that on notice. Deputy Mayor Anderson, anything further?
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about 14.2? I'm not seeing any hands up, so on that basis, we will move on from 14.2. Our next item is 15.3, which is review of policy 404, fireworks management results of public consultation. Councillor Lysandro, you have some questions.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. I have a number of questions. I'll ask them one at a time. And my first question is, can the words "and surrounding environment, including birds and wildlife" in brackets be added back into the policy at the OCM?
Councillor Sandro, are you seeking an answer to your question?
Sorry. And could environmental considerations be included in the policy, but if it was targeted specifically for larger scale and reoccurring firework events?
Sorry, Councillor Sandra, I was seeking clarification from you. Are you seeking an answer to your question from the town's governance staff about this as a governance matter on a recommendation, or are you seeking a response from the town staff on the substantive environmental issue from one of the town's other staff members, so that I know who to direct your question to?
Probably both, I'd say.
All right, I'll direct the question first to the Manager of Governance and Strategy, Ms. Branovich.
Thank you. Through the chair, it's not recommended by officers or the policy committee. However, it is open to council to make such change. Thank you.
So, Councillor Sandro, that would require an elected member to move an amendment to the review of the policy and the recommendation from the committee when the matter comes back to council next week at the ordinary council meeting. In terms of directing this now to a member of the staff in terms of the environmental aspects of it, probably going to need to go to our Acting Chief Operations Officer, Mr. Denham. Can you inform me, Mr. Denham, who might be suitable to answer this question if it's not yourself?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we take that question on notice, please?
Yes, thank you. We'll take it on notice. Councillor Sandro?
Yes, thank you. Subsequent question. Is there a way for environmental, animal and wildlife considerations to be assessed which would not incur demands and constraints on time and processes for town administration?
Mr. Denham?
Madam Chair, could we take that one on notice as well? The previous question, the Chief Community Planner has actually indicated that she can answer the previous question at this meeting now, if that's desired.
Thanks, Mr. Denham. So we'll take that question on notice and we'll go to the Chief Community Planner, Ms. Martin Good, for the previous question, and also Ms. Martin Good, if you could indicate at the same time, do you wish to take all further questions about this item?
Through the chair, yes, I'm happy to take all questions on this item. So in terms of the previous question, which was about the wording of the policy, I would reaffirm what the Manager of Strategy said in that, yes, it is open to council to make those changes to the policy. However, it's not recommended by officers. In terms of the question as to whether it can be such investigation should be included in the policy and what implications that would have for staff, quite a considerable implication for staff. In terms of what specifically that would be, staff would need time to consider to give a detailed response to councils on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin Good. I will need to, on behalf of Councillor Sandro, ask you to be able to clarify that further. Are you saying that you would be in a position to provide that information ahead of the ordinary council meeting next week by way of comments in the further consideration section of the report? Or are you saying that it would take longer than that period of time for you to be able to report back to elected members as to what would be involved?
Through the chair, we would certainly be able to give some preliminary advice. I'm not sure we'd be able to give some detailed advice. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And do I take it when you refer to preliminary advice, that advice would go in the further consideration section of the report for next week's ordinary council meeting?
Through the chair, that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sandro, including whether there's anything arising out of those answers?
Yes, there is. Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Just in terms of that response from the officer, was that specifically for, I guess my question was in relation to targeted specifically to larger scale and reoccurring fireworks events? So not ones that are shorter length but ones that are reoccurring and larger, so that the policy is more nuanced. So I guess that's my question.
Well, I understood you, Councillor Sandro, to be asking about what kind of resources would be needed from the town to do that kind of assessment.
Yes.
So
but also whether it could be implemented within the policy on a governance level.
All right, Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, in terms of the first question, in terms of focusing any additional work by town staff to be on larger events, we can certainly try and differentiate what work would be required for the larger events as opposed to the smaller events. In terms of what work impact that is going to have on staff, I think was the second part of the question. Yes, we'll give some preliminary regard to that. Sorry, was that, did I cover off the questions?
And reoccurring fireworks events, yes.
Yes,
yep.
We will include some preliminary consideration of that in the further comment section of the report. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ms. Martin Good. In that case, sorry, Councillor Sandra, before you go any further, for our minutes secretary, you can remove the taking on notice of this type of question that Mr. Denham indicated he would need to take on notice. It appears that Ms. Martin Good has answered that question now, Councillor Sandro. Councillor Sandro, would you like to please proceed?
Yes, thank you. A fourth question is, has the town sought advice from other councils within WA or interstate in relation to environmental and animal and fauna impacts? For example, City of Coburn.
You mean fauna impacts of fireworks?
Yes, the impacts of fireworks.
Thank you. Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, no, we haven't, because we've sought advice from DBCA, Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, who are the relevant authority in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin Good. Councillor Sandro.
Subsequent to that, and this probably will need to be taken on notice, so I haven't provided it in advance. Given that response, are there councils within WA or interstate that do have or take into consideration environmental and animal and fauna impacts in relation to fireworks? Just their policies, not their in-depth, if there are councils out there. Thank you.
That, just so you know, Councillor Sandro, there is still an issue with regards to hearing all of the words of your questions. Ms. Martin Good, did you get all of that sufficient to be able to answer it?
Through the chair, yes, I did hear that, but my answer is that I'm sorry, I'll have to take that question on notice. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll take that on notice. Councillor Sandro, anything further?
No, that's all. Thank you, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Devereux.
Thanks, Mayor Vernon. I just wanted to ask, and I've got a sort of partial answer, I think, just now, but I wanted to ask about the City of Coburn 2021 review and impact assessment of their fireworks, because it suggests trial alternatives could include drone shows and light shows, because it says they are appreciated, fireworks are appreciated by many, but the overall perception of fireworks is changing and more people are becoming concerned about the impact on animals and the appropriateness of the displays. My question is, if our officers aware of this review and suggestion for alternatives to be considered, and could this be encouraged as part of the policy changes we're making to the fireworks policy? Thank you.
Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, no, I wasn't aware of this, and happy to do some further research on that particular matter, include it in the further comment section of the report. Thank you.
So on that basis, we'll take that on notice, Councillor Devereux, so that it goes in the next agenda. Is there anything further?
No, many thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other elected members who have questions about this item? No, it looks like there are no more questions about this item. So we'll now move on to the last item that was listed, item 16.1. Thank you. Councillor Hamer, do you wish to go first, since it is about your notice of motion?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mayor Vernon. A couple questions. Why would a survey take 4 weeks to complete? Could this be done via an email to a number of local businesses?
Well, I will direct these questions, Councillor Hamer, but if the question is why will it take 4 weeks, then we should start with that question first before going into how the survey is conducted, because the answer to your first part of your question, why will it take 4 weeks, may very well answer any subsequent operational technical aspects that you might want to know about. So, Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, a 4-week time frame for a survey would encompass compiling appropriate questions, testing the IT, whether it's with the SurveyMonkey or some other software program. You would want a survey to be out for a minimum of 2 weeks for the public, which would include time for the communications to be promoted regarding that, and we would need time to collect and analyse those results. That would be what the 4 weeks would comprise of. Thank you.
Councillor Hamer.
Thank you. Does the town have access to recent 44%?
Sorry, Councillor Hamer, there was a bit of electronic interference in your speaking then that I could hear. I'm not sure if others heard that. You said, does the town have access to something, right? Which was it? What was it?
Google mobility data.
Google mobility data.
Yes.
Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, I don't know what Google mobility data is, so I'm not sure. I'll need to take this on notice. Thank you.
I think there is potential for me to say that, and Ms. Martin-Good might recall this, that when we had the COVID-19 response working group, we used to receive data monthly about what was going on in the town. And if memory serves me correct, we did from time to time get some information given to us that came from Google Mobility about where people were travelling based on, I think Google collects mobile phone data and stuff like that, but how accessible that information is to the town and how often, I don't really know. So that will be taken on notice. Further questions?
Yes. Does the town have any estimate from its regular community inputs to concerns around the duration of transmission, length of restrictions, masks, difficulty finding employees, operating costs, and revenue reductions?
Councillor Hamer, could I ask you to give me some indication of whether your question should be qualified with in relation to the transmission of COVID-19, or is it in relation to both the transmission of COVID-19 and public health directions associated with COVID-19 that impact on businesses, or is it only the latter and not the former? In other words, COVID-19 as a medical condition, the impacts that it might have versus COVID-19 as public health directions and things that impact upon the operation of businesses, just so that the staff know what it is that you're asking them to answer.
Sure, I didn't really think there was a difference, but if we're experiencing, at least a few thousand cases per day, I mean, what do the businesses anticipate is the duration for that to continue, or are we expecting that to last 3 months or 6 months, or what's the kind of concerns around that duration, which would obviously then lead on to health restrictions?
Well, I'm just trying to be really clear here for the benefit of the staff, Councillor Hamer, because you did ask from the various means that we have available to us what information we might have to hand about a variety of things. But if you're asking about simple things like how people are coping with having COVID, as in experiencing it as a member of the public who gets the virus, versus businesses in the town who are reporting information that the town is collecting in some manner about the impact of there being lots of people who are not coming into their businesses versus people who are unable to come into their businesses because of a variety of COVID public health restrictions and or compulsory mandates or the like, it would be important to know which aspect of it, or do you want all those aspects covered in your answers by the town staff?
I think it's the latter, more so the confidence that comes with, or the lack of confidence that comes with community transmission and how that affects community groups or businesses or not-for-profits to operate.
All right, Ms. Martin-Good, from the town's own resources, do we have any information about the number of topics that Councillor Hamer indicated?
Through the chair, I would need to take that question on notice. Thank you.
We'll take that on notice. Councillor Hamer?
And yep, that'll do for me for the. Thanks, Mayor Vernon.
Okay, thank you. Councillor I.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I just have a brief question. I suppose it's to Councillor Hamer as the person who drafted this motion. I noticed the motion says that council survey community input. Is Councillor Hamer proposing that it actually be carried out by us as councillors, or actually that council requests the CEO to do?
Councillor Hamer?
My impression was that the town would run the survey, as I experienced some advice that I was not able to run my own survey.
All right. So Councillor Ife, anything arising out of that?
Yes, I'm just wondering if Councillor Hamer would like to consider rewording his motion before next week in that case. That is all. Thanks.
I'm sure Councillor Ife, that's a question that you can take offline and deal with Councillor Hamer in due course leading up to the next council meeting. Councillor Sandro.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. I have a question just in relation to, obviously, the intent is to seek feedback from the residents and businesses in relation to COVID and what's happening and how they're being impacted, and to seek best practices. But I'm wondering whether there's any consideration for providing some type of a working group, as we did with the COVID recovery working group, in the advent that there may be increasing numbers of increasing transmission and also increasing impacts. So I'm just wanting to know if that would be a consideration and whether Councillor Hamer would even consider amending possibly this motion to look at providing that working group to be reinstated to include
so Councillor Lysandro, is your question for the administration or for Councillor Hamer?
Well, it's for the administration, whether they would, well, it's both. It's whether that could occur, whether that working recovery group could be reinstated, and also, I guess, for Councillor Hamer as well, I guess, what his thoughts would be. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll direct the first part of your question to Ms. Natalie Martin-Good with regards to the town reinstating the COVID recovery response working group.
Through the chair, there was a council report some months ago, when I say some months ago, from memory it was last year sometime, where council resolved to note that the majority of the COVID recovery strategy and the COVID action plan, the majority of that work had been completed, which was the terms of reference of the COVID working group. So in terms of restarting the group, it would be unclear to me what purpose that would be for if the recovery strategy and the action plan has either been completed or the majority of the actions in that plan are ongoing. So while it is open for council to do that, they would need to be very clear about what the terms of reference of that group would actually be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sandro. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I have a question for the staff, just in relation to the financial implications. I note that the report says there's sufficient funds exist in the annual budget, and that 110,000 has been recommended in the 22-23 budget for economic and business perception survey. How much of these funds would need to be allocated to running a survey of this type, please?
So, Councillor Anderson, the $110,000 that's referred to is both the economic development strategy and other matters, as well as the business perception survey. Are you only interested in the amount of money for the business perception survey, or are you interested in financial information about the cost of the survey proposed in Councillor Hamer's motion?
I'm actually looking at what funds would need to be utilised for Councillor Hamer's survey, and just thinking that there was the 110 that had been allocated in the report. And I'm wondering whether, well, I guess it's twofold. One, how much would it cost to run such a survey, Councillor Hamer's survey? And two, would those funds be coming out of the proposed 110,000 in the 22-23 budget, please?
Thank you for the clarification. Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, I'd need to take that question on notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Anderson, anything further?
No, nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got one or two possible questions about this item. With regards to the references by the staff in the report to, this is point 2H, where it says this is why the staff don't recommend this. It says if a formal survey was to be sent out to the business community, it would take a minimum of 4 weeks from survey creation to gathering of results. As I read the elected member motion, it's to survey community input and feedback on how the community is coping so that we could appropriately support a large number of sections within our community. So my question for Ms. Martin-Good is, the officers have only identified in their report a survey of the business community. Is it the officers' position that is it the officers' position that Councillor Hamer's motion only goes to a survey of the business community as stated in paragraph 2, I think F it was, or is the understanding that this type of community input would need to be surveyed from more than just the business community in order to be able to answer the questions that have been posed by Councillor Hamer in his motion? Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, if council was to resolve that we did a survey, it would need to be wider than the community. The purpose of paragraph 2H was simply focusing on one aspect of Councillor Hamer's notice of motion. There are other paragraphs, such as paragraphs 4 and 9 of the report, that talk about how we currently gain information from the community, whether it's not-for-profit groups or whether it's through different consultation of the town. But just to summarise, it would have to be a survey of more than the business community because of the wording that's used in Councillor Hamer's notice of motion that talks about community groups, residents, ratepayers and electors. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question to you then is, how long does the town staff estimate a survey of that breadth would take? And do you have any indication of what the cost of such an exercise would be for us to reach all of those broad sections within our community?
Through the chair, I'd need to take that question on notice.
All right, thank you. We'll take those questions on notice. Are there any further questions about this item from any other elected members other than Councillor Hamer before I give him an opportunity to be the last one to ask questions about his own motion? No, it looks like nobody else is raising their hand by the looks of it. So, Councillor Hamer, was there anything that you wanted to ask arising possibly out of questions that your fellow elected members have just asked the administration and the answers they've given?
Yes, I will respond to 2 of those questions offline for Councillor Luana and Councillor Ive. The other question, if the budget estimated costing was too high, would it be possible for council to move a motion or a motion for myself to run my own survey, being as I could do it at a lot lower cost, I feel, than administration?
So, Councillor Hamer, you're wanting to know that from either a governance perspective or a town subject matter officer perspective, because if you're just asking whether it's possible for the council to resolve, in theory, for you to run such a survey, then I suppose anything's possible in a utopian world. But look, I'll direct your question first to the Chief Community Planner and then to the Manager of Governance, because I consider your question's got both governance and substantive issues to it. Ms. Martin-Good.
Through the chair, I'm not sure I have any subject matter expert comment to make on that particular question, but I suspect that the Manager of Governance will do, so I would defer to her. Thank you.
All right, I was perhaps meaning, Ms. Martin-Good, as to whether or not your administrative staff would have a view about what utilisation would be made of by the town's, say, place leader of economic development of a survey conducted and analysed by an elected member.
Through the chair, I'm not sure that would be the town's preference.
All right, thank you. Ms. Brajanovic, as Manager of Governance, your views about that?
Thank you. Through the chair, I do not believe that council should resolve for Councillor Hamer to run this survey, as there are various governance implications in relation to this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Brajanovic. Anything further, Councillor Hamer?
Well, that's it. Thank you, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you. So there being no indication of other questions in relation to any other items that are on the agenda, we're now at item 17 of our agenda, which is questions from members without notice on general matters. Are there any questions from elected members without notice on general matters? Councillor Alessandro.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. I just have a question in relation to children crossing signs and whether the town advocates for those to be either installed or fixed, or whether that is outside of the jurisdiction of the town and some other body oversees that. Thank you.
Direct that question to the Acting Chief Operations Officer, Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies, but the question, the audio dropped out a little bit in the middle of the question. I didn't quite catch it.
Councillor Sandro, are you able to say it again, please?
Yes, thank you. My question relates to children crossing signs, the orange ones that display for, I guess, high trafficked areas, and whether they are the responsibility of the town or another body if they were to either be in need of replacement or repair.
Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Chair. Those would be the responsibility of Main Roads Western Australia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sandro. Any other elected members who have got general matter questions without notice? No, looks like there are no further questions for general matters without notice. So on that basis, we'll move to item 18 on our agenda, which is confidential matters. We have none. And so at 8:30 p.m, I declare this agenda briefing forum closed. Thank you to those who joined us on live streaming tonight. Thank you, elected members. Thank you, town staff. We will see everyone next week at ordinary council meeting, which is a very short turnaround time between our agenda briefing forum and ordinary council meeting, because we're bringing it forward to next week instead of the usual 2-week window due to the Easter holiday. So that's next Tuesday night, the 12th of April, is ordinary council meeting, and we will see everyone then, which will also be an online meeting and which members of our community are welcome to join us. But you need to contact the town staff so you can get sent a dedicated email link with your Zoom link in order to participate in the meeting. Otherwise, you can pre-submit your questions and statements in writing, and they will be read out and addressed during the course of the meeting. if you are unable to or do not wish to join the meeting electronically and participate live. So thank you.